So just before we start, I thought I would do an appropriate kind of look at the ARMA IGP Information Governance Professional Certification, since it ties in with this presentation as well as the rest of the series. The ARMA IGP certification was created to facilitate an overarching corporate information management discipline which could have the breadth of understanding to unify all the strategic corporate information areas. This, of course, requires an understanding of risk, security, IT, legal, privacy, and records and information management, commonly known as RIM, as well as the other complementary corporate disciplines, which you kind of see a little bit of a graphic look, digital representation of what that might look like, that information governance set of disciplines. With a digital transformation occurring, or at least soon to occur in most organizations, along with an exponential technology change, and all coupled with an ongoing series of negative security events that have happened around the world, it's a really good time for all major corporate disciplines to come together in a more structured and consistent way. This in order to assist their company in meeting their corporate goals. ARMA Saskatchewan is providing this sequence of presentations to facilitate a much deeper understanding for strategic professionals of some of the major information management disciplines, as well as members of senior management who may be interested in the positive impact that information governance could have on their organization. This presentation sequence continues today with Legal 101, which will set the stage for a following in-depth legal presentation at a later time. At the conclusion of this series, there will be an information governance event as well. The presentations will all be recorded so that they may be reviewed at a later date. You could use the recordings to foster internal discussion on the topic by hosting events, such as maybe a lunch and learn in your corporation. We hope you will be able to attend this full series of important and thought-provoking presentations. In case you haven't seen the new ARMA IG diagram, it's information governance, of course, in its expanded nature, dealing with all of the disciplines, here it is. And sorry for the size, some of the printing's a little bit small, maybe a little blurry, but this is what the new graphic looks like. I think it's really, really good. This highlights what we've been talking about and will continue to talk about in this series of presentations. You may also have noticed in some of the ARMA publications the term IGBOK, I-G-B-O-K, mentioned, which stands for Information Governance Body of Knowledge, which is online now and available to professional members free of charge. As a paid professional member of ARMA, you are allowed to pull down a copy of the IGBOK in PDF format for your reading pleasure. The intent of this body of knowledge is to grow and become the foundation of knowledge for information governance going forward. I'm sure all of you have been aware and perused the new ARMA website, and if you haven't, you should explore this marvelous new facelift for yourselves. For our agenda today, I thought we would do two things instead of one, which are looking at the legal department in a corporation, as well as discussing the current day board governance in many of today's organizations. If it doesn't seem too apparent at the moment how these pieces might fit together, stick with me for the rest of the presentation today, and I'll try to make it clear by the end. So resources used for the presentation. There's far too many places. I looked and searched for information for this presentation today to put them all down on paper. But the really good book that I used on board governance is listed. This is not a pick it up and read kind of book. It's fairly long and somewhat dry. But if you really like that kind of thing and want to know how the world works today, it is really a good choice. So, and now as usual, we ask our friends at Wikipedia for a quick definition. So a general counsel, chief counsel, or chief legal officer is the chief lawyer of a legal department. usually in a company or government department. Sounds pretty straightforward. Sounds pretty straightforward to me too, until I started thinking about this presentation for about legal in an organization and how it fits into the overarching scheme and the information governance pieces. So since we all kind of know about lawyers and legal departments, this Legal 101 presentation will be a little bit different than the previous 4 topics. In my mind, legal always breaks down into 2 distinct areas. So the first one is outside legal, related directly to law firms that you might hire to do legal work for you. So personally, that do work for you personally, or for your corporation, and or you know, privately for your house purchase or things like that. So the second, of course, is inside legal, where your corporation has its own internal legal counsel. Most outside legal firms, that's outside, have different areas of law that can also run to very large numbers of lawyers. A good friend of mine once was an information manager director for a very large law firm, which has over 2,000 attorneys. So it's obviously split up into numerous locations all over the world, but still the size was immense. There's also a new style of law firm today, which is virtual. My good friend John Esaza, who some of you may know from reputation at least, John will be doing the Legal 102 presentation for us very soon. And John belongs to a virtual law firm called Ramon Law. So Ramon Law speaks about disrupting the law firm model. And if you want to take a look at what that looks like, they're at ramonlaw.com. So it's a huge conglomerate of lawyers all over the world, basically, who are virtually together in this Ramon Law. It's very, very interesting model, and it works very well for things like if you're a large multi-country corporation. Works great for being able to find the legal requirements for all of those different countries you might be in. First, though, I thought we should just take a quick look at what it actually takes to become a lawyer, because although we know it takes a long time, we may not all know what that really looks like from an educational standpoint. So I said earlier, we all kind of know about lawyers and law firms, but you know, interesting thing is, what does it really look like? So each province in Canada is different, but similar, except Quebec, of course. So here is the formula for Saskatchewan, so we make it a little more specific. So to start with, a Bachelor of Arts or Bachelor of Science in any field or acceptable work towards such a degree is usually sufficient for entry into a Canadian law school. So it's always important, though, that one checks with the individual law school that they are interested in attending for its policies on what that might look like for entrance. So after you've done your preliminary university and are able to get into law school, you first have to write a law school admission test. Now, this is only given 4 times a year, so your timing has to be kind of right. Then you take your JD, Juris Doctor degree, which is it's a 3-year degree. And I know for years I didn't actually know what the JD meant on somebody's business card. I had lots of friends with a JD on their card, and I wasn't quite sure how that fit together, but there it is. Then after that, if you want, you can take a Master's of Law. That's an LL.M. which will take an additional 12 to 16 months on top of that. And now you have to be accepted as a student at law by the Saskatchewan Law Society, and also find a law firm that will allow you to article with them for 1 year, where you will definitely not be paid the kind of money that one would expect for all the hours you are going to have to put in. And my lawyer friends have always told me how difficult that 1 year articling actually was, and how many hours they actually had to put in during that year. So after that, you now need to do the Canadian Centre for Professional Legal Education, or CPLED for short, with the Bar Association, which is another 23 weeks in Saskatchewan. So I think we can all agree that becoming a lawyer is a pretty long and arduous task for anybody that wants to go in that direction. So let's home in on inside law now and the general counsel. So the thing I've always heard about the position of general counsel in most corporations is that the job is a mile wide and an inch thick, meaning that the general counsel needs to know a whole lot of things about a whole lot of things relating to the law. I have known legal departments in large corporations which had more than 200 lawyers, but the norm that I'm personally used to is 1 to 3 in size, or none at all. So it takes a fairly healthy requirement to justify that kind of inside legal in an organization. This certainly does not allow the specialization you would find, though, in most of the outside law firms of any reasonable size. This could mean, in fact, that a general counsel in a smaller corporation would likely have to hire outside legal counsel to assist in those areas of law that they're not as familiar with. Or going a step further, that might mean in that case that the general counsel is mostly managing outside legal services as a job function. So depending on how much legal activity there is in your organization, of course. The other thing that I would like to say about general counsel and corporate legal departments is that for many years, it was somewhat mysterious to me how they worked internally. So many times we would be working in a corporate legal area, and often my sense was that the legal department didn't fully understand records and information management quite as well as I kind of had hoped they would, and based on, the possible corporate risks that it might represent. And at one point, a lawyer friend of mine gave me some insight into that situation by telling me that corporate law was an extremely transactional environment. And what he meant by that was something would happen in a corporation and the legal department would deal with it. And then something else would happen and the legal department would deal with that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So instead of the strategic mindset we always hope for, often the real situation might be focused in a transactional kind of direction. This doesn't mean that the legal department in most corporations wouldn't deal with strategic things like tax, development of a legal hold process, development of a litigation framework, many other things, but quite clear to me that the small size of most corporate legal departments meant they must count on a lot of available internal resources if they're there in the first place, as well as external qualified resources for any specialized information required. So the other thing I've noted is that corporate legal departments are all really, really busy for many of those same reasons. So hard to get that kind of commitment I've found over the years from the legal departments because of the busy nature of those small legal groups. So in a company, the person holding the position of general counsel typically reports directly to the CEO. And their duties usually involve overseeing and identifying the legal issues in all departments, as well as corporate governance and business policy. The CLO, that Chief Legal Officer or General Counsel, is expected to be familiar with and advise at the most confidential levels in your organization. So this requires the General Counsel / CLO to work closely with each of the other corporate officers in your organization and their business units so that they are aware and able to advise appropriately. Also takes a bunch of time to do that. Historically, a general counsel handled administrative tasks while outside lawyers in private practice handled more complex legal work. So the general counsel position in recent years, though, has become increasingly prominent in large multinational companies, for sure, often directly advising the board of directors in place of outside lawyers. So this is your kind of link with that board of directors and the legal department. The general counsel position is now often among the most highly paid in major corporations, and highly competent government lawyers and law firm partners are often hired for general counsel roles at very prominent companies. Similar trends like this are also being seen in the UK as well as many other countries. So this is kind of a movement afoot to shift into this kind of situation. You can see the breadth of responsibility in this list. I mean, look how difficult a job it might be as general counsel to do all of these functions. Well, difficult, if not impossible, unless the legal department has many specialized individuals attached to it that could positively fulfill these requirements. As I said earlier, in my experience, the size of legal departments is usually fairly small. Many of these jobs would, of course, be advisory jobs, but we still require a fair amount of specialization knowledge in that particular area, such as tax, mergers and acquisitions, labor law, crisis management, etc. The list goes on. Most common jobs I see general counsel dealing with lately are, or legal departments inside legal or in an organization, is contract management, corporate governance, as well as advising business units, and senior management board of directors. So it's more of an advisory role, as well as kind of dealing with contract management, the legal parts of contract management, and things like that. Litigation, as it comes up, is also a main function of the general counsel. And in truth, the general counsel in your organization could have an entirely different list of duties, and you yourself may report to the legal department directly. So if we analyze all of this carefully, we could come to a few conclusions. Legal departments are generally made up of a small number of key people, number one. Number two, many of the legal jobs required in a corporation will likely be hired out to external legal counsel with specialized knowledge and skill sets. And three, the depth of understanding in an internal legal department will not likely encompass all of the jobs that could be attached to the department. So I currently have two clients who are both contemplating adding legal counsel for the very first time, which is kind of an interesting situation. And this, of course, requires a lot of contemplation as a fairly hefty budget as well. So the analysis of what has historically been paid out to any external legal counsel that could potentially be taken on by internal general counsel becomes really important. So it's a nuts and bolts numbers kind of game. It is really a numbers game in the end. In my mind, though, the biggest consideration should be an analysis and prioritization of the list of jobs that the general counsel would be required to deal with. It would make a great deal of sense to make sure that any candidate has a deep skill set in at least make sure that any candidate has the deep skill set, at least the top 2 or 3 things on the list of jobs that will be required. So you kind of analyze what is your reason, your main reason for having that kind of inside law, and see how that's going to line up in the organization, and how much money you're going to save by having that person there as opposed to using outside legal. And since the general counsel is often advising the board of directors and senior management of the corporation, all of us hope that there's a somewhat deep understanding of records and information management, corporate governance, policy, and here in Canada, privacy requirements, in the hope that the general counsel could become a champion of information governance in the organization. As we always say, information governance has a senior management support requirement. So let's just take a quick look at the list, this list of jobs and that are required for that general counsel position. So overseeing and identifying legal issues in all departments looks like a really big job to me in itself, since it will require discussion and analysis related to all of those departments and the issues they might face, so that they can understand more clearly how all that fits together. Corporate governance is a really broad topic and will require a very serious depth of knowledge. So as many of us know, policy can take inordinate amounts of time to develop, vet, and train on corporately as well. Crisis management, really an entirely different skill set, and so may be hired outside, kind of an outside specialty kind of skill set. Note that I keep saying the words hire outside. As most of us know, hiring skill sets outside usually requires a very large investment, and as such may just be added to the internal list. So in other words, we don't want to pay people outside to do this, so we'll add it on, just tack it on to somebody else's kind of job, let them wear that other hat. And it might be fielded by somebody that may not have the depth of knowledge or skill set that external resources probably or may have. As an example, litigation usually requires a somewhat specialized skill set and knowledge of topics like legal hold and e-discovery, which touch on other disciplines such as IT, records and information management, privacy, and security. So you can see how that kind of escalates, that one little thing of litigation touches on a whole lot of different areas like legal hold and e-discovery and a whole lot of other places in the organization as well. Very complex. So I think everybody probably gets the idea at this point that all of these jobs on the list are really interrelated to many different disciplines and parts of the organization. So the already difficult job of general counsel has gotten a whole lot more difficult and complex over the last 10 years. So now we're going to touch on board governance. And some of you still may be wondering why I added board governance to the Legal 101 session. So here's the logic. Through every one of these presentations we've done so far, the words "you need senior management support" are prevalent. I think if you've been with me on all of these previous ones, we've talked about that quite a bit. So the legal department, i.e. the general counsel, reports directly to the CEO and usually touches the board of directors on a regular basis. General counsel also touches all departments in the corporation related to any legal matters, and it's used for advice accordingly by all senior management. So there's no more senior management in a corporation than the CEO and the board of directors. So therefore, I added this piece about board governance on the Legal 101. The other reason is that board governance is kind of changing. That mix of how people look at governance in a board of directors is changing as we speak as well, shifting from the old style into a lot newer style. So it's important to understand the relationship there. I know for all of you on this webinar that are in government that you may not have a board of directors, but the same kind of thing applies in government as well. Since the general counsel and/or legal department advises senior management in the form of ministers, deputy ministers, ADMs, etc. So same kind of thing, just interchange the words board of directors with senior management in government. So possible board jobs. And here we go, possible board jobs. So what does the board actually do? And that's a really good question. In days gone by, the board of directors of the corporation did far less than many are doing or attempting to do today. Jobs can include oversight of shareholder engagement, strategy, risk, audit, compensation. That's audit and compensation. Cybersecurity, social media, climate change, interesting, eh? Board composition, and many, many more. So we'll not touch on all these potential jobs today. It would be a 101 session unto itself. But I think it's really important to understand that board composition and scope is changing rapidly, mainly due to the digital transformation and those things like security that have changed and escalated or are changing the way business is conducted. So a good example of that would be that many boards today are adding someone with IT and/or security expertise. And I would guess that in places where adherence to the GDPR, that's the European Union General Data Protection Regulation, which we've talked about in our Privacy 101, definite requirement. So if you have the reason for dealing with GDPR, you definitely want to think about maybe somebody with privacy expertise on that board. So maybe you're going to add a privacy expert to the board composition as well. It's been common in board structure in the past that many board members did not even have a really clear understanding of the business itself. And we're happy to leave that in the hands of the corporate senior management, such as the CEO, CIO, CFO, to deal with, and only got involved in such things as executive compensation and search. So it's a very narrow focus for a lot of those board people. In truth, I believe that all people involved in information governance today should understand how senior management functions in all areas of a corporation, including the board of directors, so that they can better assist the corporation in reaching their chosen objectives on an ongoing basis, as well as being able to better contribute with their expert knowledge when required in order to augment the board's understanding of today's really complex requirements. So let's connect all our disciplines with the board governance and relate back to the IG. Just to set the stage, without IT knowledge on the board of directors, the board will not be able to tell whether decisions made related to IT in the corporation are appropriate. Let's look at a few companies where changing times took them by surprise. The name Kodak should stand out in everyone's mind, as well as box office video, just to name a couple. Technology change, along with the way people modify their own behavior, did them and many others in. I guess we can add Toys R Us to that list as well at this point. Board of directors of any company or corporate entity, be they private or public sector, are in truth the watchdogs of the corporation and always need to pay attention and be cognizant of changing times, particularly now in times of digital transformation and massive disruption of the corporate world. Without IT competency on the board, I seriously doubt that many board of directors can even evaluate if the annual corporate goals they propose are rational. I've actually personally seen this in several different situations where the board had set goals for the corporation, publicly stated goals, and the analysis of whether they'd hit those goals or not couldn't really be made because there's such a complex interrelationship between all the goals. For instance, if on an on-premise infrastructure or a move to the cloud is the right direction, so keep it inside or move it to the cloud, if that's one of the kind of things that is a big deal for the year, then how do you know if there's a move to the cloud is the right direction to proceed from a technology standpoint if you don't have that kind of expertise on the board? Security expertise is being added to boards of directors across North America, very specifically being added at a fairly rapid pace. And why, you ask? I guess everybody kind of knows why. Let's take a quick look at Target. We had Target in Canada, but of course they left shortly thereafter. But if we look at their kind of situation after they had their breach, so after their corporate breach, the board of directors of Target was actually sued, along with key management, for breach of fiduciary duty and waste of corporate assets. So by March of 2014, Target had already faced more than 90 lawsuits filed by customers and banks for negligence and compensatory damages. 90 lawsuits. That was, of course, on top of other costs estimated to run into the billions. For example, Target spent $61 million US during February, just in February alone in 2014, responding to the breach, while the holiday shopping profits fell 46%. Well, of course they did, because nobody wanted to deal with Target because they had a breach. So that was against the same quarter in 2013. So the profits fell 46%, and they spent $61 million as well. So what about risk related to all of this? So does the board actually have a vision of what a digital future might look like for the corporation? Does the board and executive have a clear understanding of how technology is distributed in your sector? So just in your sector, your industry, or even in similar sized organization to yours? Are your organization's business and IT strategies aligned and integrated? Does your strategy contain a comprehensive overview of all your major stakeholders in the way which technology can enhance communication and engagement with them? Is the board able to oversee IT acquisition, implementation, maintenance, and disposal to meet the board's obligations? Are there internal controls in place in the organization that will give the board some kind of guarantee that processes are being dealt with in a cohesive kind of way? Does the board have a grasp on things like cybersecurity insurance, IT risk, liability of sensitive information being stolen or misused, identification of key information assets, and whether or not they can be found if required? It's always one of the things that RIM people are mostly interested in, is can we find this stuff in the end? Does the corporation have policies in place for social media, mobile devices, cloud computing, employee use of personal devices, etc.? How about large IT project risk? Can the board even assist the corporation at all in that regard? And do they have to take the word of the CIO without any knowledge of their own, specialized knowledge of their own on the board about how that might work, or how it could fit, or how it could fail, I guess, in the end? Can the corporation weather a communication crisis if some form of reputational risk occurs? We could go on and on with this, but let's move along to privacy. So if you weren't able to be on the last Privacy 101 presentation in January, and I strongly advise you to go back and listen to it as it relates to the GDPR legislation specifically, that is soon to come into effect in the European Union, and some of the possible direction I mentioned during the presentation, that Canada will ultimately attempt some like legislation in the not too distant future. Whether a corporation is subject to freedom of information or not, their stakeholders, both internal and external, absolutely expect, that's you, absolutely expect their personal information to be well looked after. And it's my belief that this trend will put more of a strain on both public and private sector corporations in the future. The cost of right to be forgotten alone will be very, very substantial. Since that presentation, the privacy one I did, the last one, the Canadian Parliamentary Committee has recommended that the Personal Information Privacy and Electronic Documents Act, that's PIPEDA, as I call it, be updated in a number of ways that could meet GDPR requirements. So they are looking to deal with that in the not too distant future as well. In addition, the committee recommends that government work with the EU to determine what would constitute adequacy status for PIPEDA in the context of the new General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR. So as we see, that is moving ahead. And now nothing ever moves really fast in any country, but you can see that the writing's already on the wall that that's going to have to move in Canada and shift. PIPEDA was in need of some facelifting and upgrading, and this is a perfect opportunity for everyone to make those changes to get an attaboy from the European Union that we have like legislation. So some board of directors do have a general counsel to advise them, but many do not. And sometimes the general counsels themselves do not have deep knowledge of many of the issues that we've just discussed today. In many cases, a complex freedom of information request, a litigation, or even a complex legal hold requirement might not even be able to be fulfilled in many corporations because there's no procedures, there's no processes, or even IT infrastructure capability to deal with that kind of situation. And finally, to RIM, last but not least, records information management probably has more valuable information related to the things we discussed today and previously, and at the very least needs to be part of any group that would assist legal, senior management, and the board in understanding these complex issues moving forward. Remember from the first presentation we ever did, information governance is a team sport, and the complexities we face today will be insurmountable without that IG team initiative. So I apologize to everybody for the size of this diagram. As you can see, many of the tasks reside in the center, since all the disciplines have very similar requirements. Senior management support is universal, and board governance is changing. Current models of board governance suggest that board composition also have expertise grounded in security and IT. I would go so far as to say that board composition should include an information governance professional who can bring expertise in all the disciplines listed. Risk management has become the primary responsibility of senior management, more so in recent times as digital transformation occurs and security breaches happen on a regular basis. So risk has moved up that bar dramatically. I can say that I've actually seen that personally. 5, 6 years ago, you never heard about risk management in an organization, really. Even if they had risk people on staff, it was not highlighted in any way. And in the last 5, 6, 7 years, there's always risk management as part of a discussion of information governance. So all these disciplines can call for appropriate policies, procedures, and training. As this presentation series has progressed, I hope we've seen more similarities in the requirements. From here, our last presentation series will be RIM, Records and Information Management 101. In conclusion, either the internal legal department, general counsel / chief legal officer, or even a trusted external legal resource, if no internal resources exist, should be made aware of information governance and the assistance that records and information management professionals, as well as the key professional resources of other information governance disciplines in the corporation, can deliver as a focused group dealing with information governance in your corporation. I hope you've enjoyed this Legal 101. It was more an insight kind of presentation as opposed to what the last ones have looked like. A lot of this is kind of insightful to me, is how do you think about corporate legal, inside legal, as opposed to external, and how might you, with that understanding in mind, work more closely with them to make a difference in your organization. So I look forward to delivering the last of the 6 in our Information Governance 101 series, Records and Information Management, very, very soon. And I know this has been a little shorter than some of the other presentations, but I hope that you've enjoyed it, and thank you very much for being with me today.
Thanks a lot, Rick, for sharing this with us. Quite often, I have found that with where I work, we report directly to Chief Legal Counsel, which is very interesting. So we have a great relationship there. And if there's one thing that one of the things that our audience could have as a takeaway is, if you haven't gone to your legal department, whether you have an internal legal department or you use an external source, find out what's in standard contracts as they relate to non-disclosure agreements and cloud-based partners or storage spaces, so that you have an idea of what legal is requiring those third-party vendors to do, or contractors, in terms of accessing your company's information. Because you may find out that it's not as stringent as it should be, and that's where you can add some value.
Thanks, Denise. That's great. Very, very valid comment.
So once again, thanks a lot, Rick, and we look forward to the next presentation. I hope everybody enjoys viewing this, and we will be back soon, coming to a screen near you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.